Good morning, everybody. That's the last time that I get to play the Manifest commercial before we're at Manifest in person. So really excited to see you all in Las Vegas in a couple of weeks. Meet Me for Coffee will be there. We will be posting content. We'll be running some really fun podcast short clip episodes, actually, and excited to be bringing you guys kind of a live look at what's happening in Manifest through the Meet Me for Coffee channel. So you can be watching our page on LinkedIn, YouTube, or listening on Spotify, Apple, whatever works for you guys the week of Manifest. And we'll be bringing you some really cool sneak peek previews of what's going on. If you didn't make it this year, you didn't register yet, you can still go register if you're going to make a last minute decision. I'm the queen of making last minute decisions, you guys. So there's a link right there if you still want to check it out. But without any further ado, I want to jump into our Meet Me for Coffee segment today. I have a very awesome guest with us today. I'm going to go ahead and bring in Kevin Hill. He's the owner of Brush Pass Research. Kevin, how are you doing this morning?
Doing great, Samantha. Thanks for having me on the show.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. I would love for you to kind of give us a little bit of an introduction. Tell us a little more about your background and what you're doing now. You made some changes recently, but you have a really cool business and some exciting projects going on.
Yeah, a little bit about me is I was a freight broker at one point and developed a company called Carrier Lists that was used by freight brokers to source carriers. And along that road, joined Freightway. It was back in 2019, and managing editor over there, executive publisher for a couple years, and left about a year ago and started Brush Pass Research. And what it is kind of the playbook that I always use to sell to freight brokers, kind of that contact database along with what you'd get in discovery calls, TMS, what kind of tech stack that they're running, and out marketing that to freight tech, anyone selling to freight brokerages, really.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, good morning, Matt. Good morning, Thomas. Good morning, Josh. Good morning, Scott. We have some people. Sounds like people are drinking caffeine this morning, which I love. Like, meet me for coffee. We actually have some people awake and ready to roll. I did just finish my espresso, so I should have plenty of energy for this one today. Um, great introduction, Kevin. Thanks for the background. I think I've been following you now for at least a year or two. I'm definitely familiar with your work when you were with Freight Waves. And then I think a lot of people have been enjoying the content that you've been putting out here lately. And just yesterday you shared a post and I reshared it to my LinkedIn page as well as we were prepping for this. But you've kind of had a couple posts in the just last couple of weeks talking about kind of just the sheer number of active brokerage authorities and what's going on in that space. Can you kind of tell me, with the research you're doing, first of all, what companies are you researching? Kind of what's the subset of data that you primarily focus on at BrushPass? And then talk to me a little bit about just like the general landscape right now. Like, as BrushPass research is seeing it, what's going on in the brokerage space?
Yeah, so to answer the first part of the question, there's just under 30,000 active MCs for
Okay.
brokerages out there right now. So part of that is slicing and dicing, getting a great subset. If you're selling, especially technology, into the space, you really need to segment this out. You're
Sure.
going after large cap freight brokerages, mid cap, growth cap, kind of how many seats do you need to really have a viable customer. And once you really start looking at the data, you find that the largest 1,000 freight brokerages out there control about 80% of the gross revenues for the industry. The load counts for the industry as well. So what you really want to do is segment that out. So talking about the largest, and that encapsulates about $10 million in gross revenue and above. You have about 1,000, and then you probably have 2 or 3,000 that are $1 million to 10 million, and then you have, what does that leave us with? About 27,000 active MC numbers now.
A
That
lot, Kevin, a
a
lot.
lot, right? A lot of them that are doing under 100 or doing under $1 million a year. So, are those really viable prospects for your business? And those are decisions that you have to make. And then once you make that decision,
Right.
you have to be able to segment that out easy. So, and that's what we do at BrushPass Research as well.
Yeah. I mean, I can absolutely see how that plays into the tech space, for sure. Just understanding, especially like in my consulting work now, working with brokers of all sizes and seeing how different tools and technologies don't always work, right, within different
Hmm.
size businesses. But just I think that those numbers are just mind blowing to me. That I think you said there's only 1,000, right, that are above 10 million out of the 30,000 active authorities.
Yeah. So, what are all those 27, 25, 27,000 MC numbers? What are they doing? It's one person shops in a lot of instances, right? A lot of them probably don't really move freight at all.
Right.
Maybe part
Okay.
time. Maybe it's part of a side hustle, even. And then you have, how many of those are not really legitimate?
Mm,
And that's a question that I get asked all the time. I had my post yesterday, and someone asked me as well, and it's really hard to determine that way how many are double brokers, right? Because that's what
sure.
everyone's always curious about, that how many of
Right.
these are double brokers, and it's hard to determine that as well. But if you're selling into freight brokerages, it doesn't really matter, because you have this 1,000 group that's doing 10 million or more, and then another maybe 3,000 that are doing over $1 million to just at 10 million, and that's what you should be focused on.
And when we think about just, I think the industry in general too, to me, it's always kind of crazy to put things in perspective because admittedly, brokerage is the space that I have lived and breathed for most of my
Mhm.
career. But you first take out the percentage of freight that's run by carriers direct, especially in the domestic transportation space, which is the overwhelming majority of freight that moves that shippers route. So then we take that minority percentage, whatever. I think that that's seen an increase. I don't know if you have numbers on that in recent years.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, a little bit. Typically it's been around 7%. Let's say 10 years ago, 20 years ago is 7%. That's gotten up to 20% now. And,
yeah.
a little bit, Armstrong and Associates always publishes their numbers on that domestic truckload freight aspect of it. And 2019, before the pandemic, it was about $90 billion. And you look at that, that's out of 400 billion,
That's
that's
still
a
a
little under
staggering number.
20%. I know, right? They're
Yeah.
staggering numbers.
Yeah.
But in 4 short years, through the pandemic and through the supply
Mhm.
chain constraints, that doubled to
Yeah.
160 billion. Right,
Yeah.
truckload revenues went up too. So we're running about 20% of the freight is ran by 3PLs, freight brokers, third
Sure.
party people.
And then of that 20%, you have probably 90% of that sitting within a top 1,000.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. 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 At least 80%. 80% of that is sitting with those top 1,000 firms. And if you take that to the top 4,000 firms, you're looking at 95, 96, 97%. So when you're looking at volume, you're looking at revenues, if you're looking selling into to freight brokerages, that's going to be the meat of everything, right? That's where all the revenue lies. And then you have another 25,000 MC numbers out there that you really shouldn't be messing with,
Right.
because until you go through that top 4,000, right? Though there's no reason to really prospect out in one and two people's shops for the most part.
And so talking about like people selling technology into these brokerages, but let's talk about the actual, I guess, brokerages and their decision making around technology, because now we've seen just unprecedented advancements in the last 5 years. I think I've said this
Hmm.
before. I said this on my last episode that we've had technology in the space now for a while, but just in the last 3 and 5 years, it's just exploded, and there's been a lot of investment in the space. But I think one of the biggest things that I would note is how accessible it is and how instant it can be. So you don't have to have software, you don't have to have servers anymore in an office. You can cloud-based technology systems, right? You can
Hmm.
pay for it and get a login and be up and going within hours or days of deciding that you want to purchase something. So with that accessibility in mind, are more and more brokerages trying to lean into something as simple as TMS technology or tracking systems, and at what point do they kind of make that decision, if we can see that from a revenue standpoint? Like when they get how big, do they start to lean into TMS?
I think so. I have TMS information on that top 1,000, and everyone 100% coverage on 10 million and above, and I think it'd probably be 98% from 5 million and above. You get
Okay.
down to 1 to 5 million, and that might drop down a little bit, but I think it's accepted, right? Whether no matter what, you're right, you have to have a TMS to run your system, right? To keep your data in line, to where it's accessible, where you have some historical records, and that's for for future strategies, future decision making. But really to keep a pulse on your business, you have to have a TMS, and I think that's what you find in the data too. 10 years ago, I don't. And I got in the business about 11 years ago as a broker. We had a TMS, but it was kind of a new thing, right? It
Yeah.
was it was it was like that first wave of getting a TMS, and now what you're seeing, especially in the last 3 or 5 years, like you were saying, is yeah, we have a TMS, right? But we need something that integrates with our other business partners, with our customers, with our carriers, with these third party tools that, hey, we would just have a sign on. We don't have to house that data anywhere. It's all web based or cloud based systems. And the most important thing about a TMS or any ERP system right now
Sure.
is connectivity. You need to be able to connect to all these different vendors and customers and carriers for it really to pay dividends.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. And Josh just said technology is amazing. Focus on a niche is key in our opinion. I don't know if he's talking about a niche for the technology providers, but I'm going to run with that anyway, because that's something I've noticed too, is that a lot of the technology that's been coming out lately, they're not trying to be like this super broad, we cater to
Hmm.
everyone and we do everything anymore. Like we're comfortable with niching down in the tech space and selling into those niches. And so we have a lot more options when it comes to tools, and they all do quite a variety of different things, which I think is pretty neat when we were talking about this conversation, where different size brokerages are going to have different needs when it comes to
Yeah.
technology or complexity of their systems as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. You say 3 to 5 years. So remember 3 to 5 years ago when you had a lot of tech companies coming out saying, oh, we're going to disrupt the entire industry.
Yeah.
We are going to change everything our company is. And that didn't really work out that well, right?
Yeah.
That they failed at that because there's just so many problems to solve that you can't attack them all at once. No one company can. So yeah, you do find a lot of very niche players in tech now, which is good.
Yes.
It's fragmented, which is not so good,
Mhm.
but it's good that we're going to tackle this one problem and we're going to tackle it really well instead of we're going to tackle everything and just kind of make it up as we go. And we saw some tech companies 3 to 5 years ago, 7 years ago, try that approach and just didn't really work out.
No, and I love the word fragmented. I think fragmentation is going to be an eternal part of this industry. And I
Oh
think
yeah.
that I don't want that to sound pessimistic. I think by nature of how one vast this industry is, how
Hmm.
absolutely huge the transportation space is, there's never going to be a system that can accommodate everyone's wants, needs, desires, and operations across the board. And it just, even when you think about some of the most commonly used platforms in this industry, like DAT, for example,
Hmm.
people still use it very different and they pay for different features and functionalities and seats. And so even something that might exist as a platform that's pretty widely accepted still gets utilized differently, needs to be integrated differently, needs to be,
Hmm.
there's all these factors that go
Yeah.
into it. And I know that we touched on this also in my last podcast episode with the panel that we had on, but just capitalism, businesses, unique operations, the way you choose to run margins, it's all going to keep this industry fragmented, right? And I don't think it's necessarily always a bad fragmentation. I really don't. I think you can see a lot of niche providers servicing very like unique needs on the shipper side as well. And they need those partnerships. So I think
Uh,
it's kind of beautiful myself, but I do think it's very also great how well technology is adapting to fit all those different needs.
You're exactly right. And when you said, shippers need these tailored needs, transportation is a reflection of business in North America or globally, but let's
Yeah.
just say that the US, right? How many different industries do you have? How many different niches? How many different shippers do you really have? I don't even know the number, but it's in the millions, right? They all need something a little bit different.
Right.
And as long as you have so many products being moved over the road, you're going to have niches and tailored solutions for all of those, which means that it's going to be fragmented. And I think everyone should just embrace the fragmentation and not worry too much about the consolidation because it's very hard to consolidate all those different niches
Mhm.
and then scaling up in logistics, especially as an operator, especially on the carrier side, but even on the broker side, it's tough to do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's my one line takeaway from this one, Kevin. You said embrace the fragmentation. So I think that's the direction that we're all moving in. And I mean, that's so true. And hey, I wanted to take a second. I actually didn't plan this at all. So the universe just loves me for this one. But today is our first day that I can announce that Meet Me for Coffee is now sponsored by Thai TMS, and didn't actually plan to talk about TMSs or technology today, but here we are. So I wanted to take a second to give them a shout out. I am excited about this partnership. In my last role, prior to starting Samantha Jones Consulting, I scaled a brokerage and I did the demos and all the research on dozens of TMS systems. And I chose and made the decision to go with Thai TMS. And it did a great job for our business and took us from $0 revenue to millions of dollars of revenue in short order and grew with our needs. And so, I feel comfortable and confident recommending them and would love to talk through anyone who has questions about selecting a TMS software in general. So please use me as a resource. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Please don't hesitate to reach out to Ty directly. He has some awesome team members. So with that
And
said,
same here. That Ty was a longtime sponsor of Put That Coffee Down.
yeah, that's right.
So Mitch and Sean, great people,
Mhm.
great company. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes. So let's keep building on this and kind of talk about a little bit more about technology, but I want to talk about it in the sense of as one of the factors that goes into kind of understanding what makes a brokerage maybe valuable or fit in a certain space. And so talking about the differences in those top 1,000 and kind of even like the medium to large or medium to small, as far as flexibility, technology, being publicly traded or private, just all of these different factors that kind of go into how these companies are operating, their speed to be able to react, to make decisions. And I'm going to be honest, I kind of want to come from the stance that I think right now in this market environment, this is a serious opportunity for medium, these smaller to medium, or even, sub 100 or sub $1 billion organizations to really pull ahead and to kind of take up some space and make some ground. Because if you've been paying attention, obviously in the news, everyone sees these layoff headlines, these changes, and we're seeing it with, Coyote, with Uber, with CH Robinson, which these large companies. And I think that that's an end result of not having the flexibility and the ability to make quick decisions and use technology to help scale and other factors, among other factors, of course. But I just think that this is really a moment for like these medium to smaller brokerages. And I'd love to just kind of take some time here to really unpack this and hash this out with you.
No, I agree with you. I mean, it's a chaos, challenges are great opportunities, right? Crisis is the mother of all opportunities. And I think this is where, if you are a growing brokerage, 20, 30, 40, $50 million, it doesn't really matter. But if you're on a growth phase, you can really take market share because I feel like the SMB shippers have been pretty consistent throughout this whole process. And it's different moving SMB freight than it is enterprise freight. Enterprise freight, you're going to get hit much harder in this environment. And as you said, the larger the organization, doesn't matter if it's in logistics or CPG or aerospace, it doesn't really matter, right? The larger the organization, the more bureaucracy is there, the harder it is to make any pivots whatsoever. Oftentimes making a pivot, doing something different is a threat to your current business. So it leads to a lot of inaction, but you find that in large corporations. Sure. So the larger you are, the harder it is to adapt to market changes. And that's what we've seen in a lot of cases. I know a lot of the smaller brokerages out there, let's say 20 or $30 million, they haven't lost any customers, right? That they're doing more loads than they were 2 years ago, basically flat on the gross revenue, maybe dip down a little bit, but you can only charge what you can charge, right? It's
sure.
You're trading transportation, right? You can't just make up your prices, right? It's, you have to go with the market rate. And if the market rate's 40% lower than it was 2 years ago, those are the prices, right? You can get a little bit of premium out of there depending on your niche, but you're handcuffed in a lot of ways to that.
So I talk a lot about sustainable revenue. It's kind of one of my taglines, but I think that really for me, if I geek out on anything like the most in the brokerage space, it's cash flow, because I've yet to come across a business industry that operates on such slim margins as an acceptable standard. Like this is just how this whole industry is. We're talking businesses running on anywhere from maybe 6 to 20 something percent. Depending on the year, depending on the month, depending on the seasonality of the cycle. But when you think about that, like you're running entire companies and organizations on those profit margins. I would say that the larger these organizations get, the bigger they are, oftentimes the more diversified they get, right, into other solutions and services that start to be a little bit more of like that cash cow that kind of produces those 20, 30, 40% margins maybe on different various services. And I think that's probably their only saving grace in seasons like this. Because I think that the margin compression that happens in these low markets is just by nature of operational models and size easier to navigate in a smaller, medium-sized brokerage than it is for those large organizations.
It is. And part of that is maybe because they're not as diversified, right? Diversification increases the complexity, right? And if you can find the cash cow, great. Most places don't, though, right? That they, I think it was Charlie Munger, maybe, that always said, that the fastest way to burn cash is through growth.
I thought you were going to say through a brokerage, but no, that's kind of
it is. That is another way to do that. How to be a millionaire is start with 10 million
Yeah.
and own a trucking company or brokerage and leave with $1 million. But a lot of, you have these different products and part of the tech play back 3 or 5 years ago when they wanted to build platforms and have a service for everything, is that a lot of those are just money losing, right? You're just never going to get a foothold in those places. So, or in those new business lines, right? You're just burning money, and that handicaps you on being able to pivot, or limits your flexibility in markets like this. So the larger you are, the more money and more problems in a lot of ways. But
Yeah.
if you're a smaller brokerage, you're a brokerage. You're not really worried about getting in the factoring business or getting into this other line of business. You are just moving freight, and to go back to your point, you are trying to pay your carriers and as quickly as possible, and
Yeah.
trying to get payment from your customers within 60 days if you're lucky,
Yeah.
right? And you
Yeah.
become this bank with these mismanaged cash flows, and you just try to navigate that and grow while you're doing that. And those are your stresses, right? It's not keeping thousands or millions of public investors happy
Yeah.
with your quarterly results, and which is challenging. You see that with the public companies.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're talking a lot about brokerage today. That's obviously the area you operate in. But I want to talk about carriers as brokers interact with them, and in what
Mm-hmm.
capacity. Because obviously at the end of the day, the only reason brokerages exist is to find trucks and bring in trucks to shippers. So can you talk to me about who are the carriers that are moving brokered freight? Because we see all this data on, I think one of the ones that gets tossed around the most is that over 80% of, asset authorities are 5 trucks or less, I think is the number. But I don't think that's necessarily actually representative of trucks on the road, and then of who brokers are contacting and partnering with to move shipper freight. At least that was not my experience when I was in the brokerage space,
Mm-hmm.
is that it was just heavy owner op churn. So what does the data actually see though? Or was that just my experience?
No, if you ask any broker who moves brokered loads, they're going to tell you, oh, the owner operators do. But if you go in and actually look at their carrier management programs, you're going to find that that's not really even true. And
Yeah.
what you find, the stat that everyone does, whether it's 90% or 80% of all trucking companies have 6 or fewer trucks, is an accurate statement, right?
Right.
That is an accurate statement. What is implied with that is that all these trucks on the road are from fleets 6 or fewer trucks, or
Right. That 80%
whatever,
is
right?
the trucks on the road. Right.
It's not at all, right? A third of the trucks on the road are from the top 1%, or the top 30
Mm,
trucking companies, or 20 trucking companies, right?
yeah.
Um, Only 15% of the trucks on the road come from 1 to 3 truck fleets,
Wow.
right? If
Yeah.
you bump that up a little bit, then you might have 20%. Most of the biggest chunk of the road, or the biggest chunk of the trucks on the road, if you look at 4 or 5 trucks to 100 trucks, that is about 35% or 40% of all the trucks on the road. So if
Yeah.
you add in the 15% to that number, gets you to 55%. Another 33% or something gets you to close to 90% of all the trucks. And then you have the fleets from 100 that fills in that gap. But yeah, if you look at small fleets, the actual trucks they represent are only about 15%, which
Right.
makes sense when you start thinking about it, because you have all these MC numbers, or all these companies with very few trucks, right? It takes
Sure,
what?
because for every MC, you might only have 1 truck, right? But
Yeah,
that doesn't add up as fast as 1 MC with 100 trucks.
yeah.
So
So you need 100 MC numbers for owner operators to get to one 100 truck fleet.
yeah.
So you can see where the imbalance is, but you have this narrative out in the industry where everyone's an owner operator. There's
Yeah.
500. You hear this a lot. 500,000 owner operators. Well, that's not even close to being reality. There's maybe 80 to 100,000. And maybe a little bit more now. And most of my research I did on this was pre-pandemic, so 2019. But directionally, it's all going to be the same, right? the percentages might change a little bit. Dramatically pulled back, just like brokerages are pulling back right now. Those owner operators are pulling back, and I was about to go into a whole capacity thing, but
Well,
I'll spare everybody
maybe we
that.
should do that too.
So I mean, like if you look at the MC numbers for, let's say, owner operators, right, or this increase in MC numbers during the pandemic, does that really add new drivers? Or are company drivers quitting to start their own
Right.
MC, or to get their own MC number? Well, that's a net of 0 drivers added to the pool. And now we're seeing drivers leave. Well, now, are they going to become company drivers again? So are drivers really leaving the market?
Sure.
We know MC numbers are leaving the market, but is that driver really leaving the market? And that's something that is cloudy, and that's what you get with fragmentation that we see in this industry. Yeah. And that's the reason, if you don't embrace it, it'll just drive you crazy.
Yeah. But I mean, that was such a good few minutes. So thank you for that. But I think that the most important part of that is just there's absolutely a stigma and a perception across shippers and across brokers themselves and carriers that brokers they exist to bring in owner operator capacity, onesie twosies. They're your, oh, I'm in a pinch, I need someone in a flexible situation. But I can't emphasize enough how amazing some of these 20 to 100 truck fleets are. I mean, these are well-established trucking companies running really, really great operations, and they're operators. They're not always usually sellers or account managers or the most technologically advanced and ready to integrate with your APIs and your EDIs and do all of this stuff. And so it's like, let them operate, let them execute, and then find the brokers who understand how to partner and bring that capacity in. And it's just, that's why I'm such a passionate person in the brokerage space, is because I see the good that can come from this, and all these amazing trucking companies that the right brokers can be pairing with the shipper's freight. And it hurts my heart a little bit that some of these perceptions are so out of proportion on what's really going on in the space.
Yeah, if you think about it, when I was a broker, my greatest relationships were with the 5, 10, 15, 20 truck fleets.
Right.
That, if you think about it, if you're running a 20 truck fleet, you don't really have the cash flow, 1, 2, 3% margins, right? You're not hiring salespeople. You're not hiring. And if you have one of your core customers who's going to move about, let's say 70 or 80% of your freight, you're going to go directly with a shipper around you. You still have that 20%, those backhauls, right, coming back into your area to get reloaded, where you need strong broker relationships. Don't necessarily want to live off the board coming back. Sometimes you do, but oftentimes that's with really strong broker relationships that you've developed over the years. And the most successful brokers I know have a core group of carriers that, that fit that description, 20, 30 truck fleets, and they run consistent, regular freight. And that's what you need to be successful as a freight broker. Absolutely. Not, ones and dones all the time, right? You need that stable, predictable cash flow, margin, revenue, right? To really be able to operate long-term, sustainably, as you said.
And I don't like to hyper focus on failures, but Convoy made it very public that they're over 90%, I think, or something like that, of their capacity was less than 10 truck fleets. So I mean, among other reasons, I think that kind of was part of the issue. And fundamentally is that those onesie twosies don't provide as much of the stability and security that shippers need and that brokers actually need to be successful.
Yeah, if you think you have one truck, you have to go where the money makes sense for you. And oftentimes that's not with 1 or 2 customers, right? I mean, or that's not going to be consistent long term, right?
Yeah.
You might operate a few months in this lane and then move on to something else.
Yeah.
But you need to maximize what revenue you can bring in if you're an owner operator. And there's not a lot of freight stable enough for owner operators. So that's the reason why they're moving around a little bit in better markets.
Yeah. Well, we're over on time, but that's okay, because I don't know if people have noticed, but over the progression of the year of Meet Me for Coffee, I just kind of care a little less about my timing. We go a little longer these days. Good morning to Katie, Matthew, Rodney, Jackson, Ken. Elijah. Thank you guys for listening today and for joining us. If anybody has any questions, feel free to go ahead and drop them in. We'll get to those as well. But I think I want to wrap this up with kind of just some final thoughts around maybe a little bit of advice from Kevin and myself and the brokerage landscape on something that I get asked a lot by people starting in the industry or by clients or people I'm working with or talking to is, what should we be doing now? What should we be doing in these little markets, or how are we reacting to technology? What technology should we be considering? Just there's all of these things as a broker that you have to be considering. And I'll kind of put my 2 cents in, and then I'm going to kick this one over to you, Kevin. But I think that the number one thing I suggest is people need to give a pretty good look at themselves internally and leaders need to decide, where do we want to be in 1 year? Where do we want to be in 5 years? And kind of decide what your goals are in the brokerage space. Because if you're that $20 million brokerage and you want to be knocking on 50 within the next year or two, or if you're 50 and you want to be at 100 million in the next year or two, there are very real challenges, but rewards that come with those different revenue breaks. And I know that that's type of stuff you're seeing, Kevin, as you're looking at who's doing what with their research and their revenue. And so I just encourage people to say, where do I want to be? And then how do I start acting like that broker today? How do I start kind of like laying the groundwork to be that person in a year? If my goal is to be $100 million and I'm not entertaining the enterprise space because I'm scared of it or I'm intimidated by it, there's a good chance that something in that space is going to help you push those revenue goals, right? And so how are you kind of leaning into that and confidently pushing into the space that that you want to find yourself in? And so that's just kind of some thoughts there, but it goes for technology. It goes for your factoring or your financial partnerships. There's all sorts of parts of brokerage that you have to consider. How am I going to accomplish my goals and where do I need to be? And you are, I don't want to say constrained is the right word, but you have limitations based on the decisions you make for technology, financial partnerships, and things like that. So that's my 2 cents. But Kevin, what would you say to people right now who are starting a brokerage, growing a brokerage, trying to look out to their next set of goals? What are your thoughts?
Well, my number one thought is take your advice. It's a whole new set of challenges, a whole new set of realities in technology, in financial partners. How are you going to finance this? Working capital and capital investments. It is technology, because 20 million versus 50 million. It's another tech stack, right? It's another customer pool too. I mean, and you talk about enterprise, you have to, if you want to be $100 million brokerage, you have to enter the enterprise space, and do it quite heavily. Carrier, right? Carrier relationships. The market's going to turn. You have to have all this in place before it turns. You can't start thinking about it once it turns, or you're going to miss out on the next upside. I think one of the big things for someone in the leadership position about growth and especially 20, 30 million, is delegation. Delegation. So you can work on all these problems of growth and get a plan lined out. You have to delegate, especially sales, because you find that you have natural salespeople who can grow a brokerage to 20 million or 10 million, whatever that number is. But at some point, you have to delegate those tasks out to a team of people to be able to scale. Because if you can't delegate, you can't scale.
Sure. Absolutely. No, that was a great one. I mean, delegation, I think, is one that's often overlooked, especially when we're talking about advice to leadership, because leadership's always looking at it like, how do we make sure that we get this accomplished, and how do we, help kind of lead this charge? And sales is funny to me, because once a seller, always a seller. I mean, I can't think of a single CEO right now at $100 million brokerage that doesn't still probably get involved in sales.
Oh yeah, they love to, but they can't be involved in day-to-day sales.
Right.
They have to
Absolutely not. No.
Yeah, they have to worry about growth. They have to worry about the challenges that you laid out, and you can't be on the phone selling all day and trying to figure out. You can't work in your business and on your business at the same time. And
I had a client of mine, a CEO and a founder, and he said just a habit of his that he enjoys is, like, every Saturday morning, he doesn't work in the business, he works on the business, is what he says. where it's like
Yeah.
just creative time and like time set aside that he actually enjoys, that's productive, but it's not putting yourself into the day-to-day chaos and the things that are growing a brokerage. And so on that note, I did have Scott ask a question. If you were to start a brokerage today, first of all, would you? And if so, why? And how do you make it? I'll go ahead and I'll add my thoughts to this real quick. I love the idea of starting a brokerage in a low market, because the
Yes.
people who come in these high markets and think that this is normal, these are margins, this is acceptable, you get comfortable, you get kind of complacent with that. That becomes the expectation. That happened a lot during COVID. We had a lot of people come in, start making a lot of money, and they are hurting, if not already closing their doors because of the slow market. And so to me, if you can figure out how to run a brokerage right now on 10% margins and start scaling it in a really hard market to sell, and then things change, I mean, you're positioned to continue to succeed and continue to grow. And now you have a precedent too for understanding the next low market cycle, because it is a cyclical industry, right? And so I would absolutely say yes, start in the lows and build. And to all of my existing clients and to new clients and people I talk to, I say these are the times you have to be pushing so hard. Even if you can't make that investment yet in technology, are you making sure that you have demoed it all? You've talked with the leadership at those companies. That are you 100% confident in your current factoring partners' capabilities or your financial partners' capabilities? Do you have your backups lined up? Do you have your next steps lined up? Do you know when you hit $20 more million of revenue where you're going to go, like what the next step is for you, so you're ready to invest in your planning? And so for me, it's like forward thinking and just constantly being aware of what your options are and looking for ways to improve and know where you're headed.
Yep,
Anything?
and Scott, I agree that there's no better time than down market. A recession is the best time to start a business. Samantha laid it out, the reasons why, and yeah, it really is. I don't know why, but it makes always made more sense to me, because yeah, you learn the hard lessons, and you don't really, and this really is true for freight brokerages, right? You're not a real company until you've been through a couple down cycles, right?
Sure.
And then you know how to handle it, and you can grow out of that. But it takes a couple down cycles. Tech companies are the same way, right? It takes a
Yeah.
couple down cycles to weather those storms, to have the sustainable business that you're trying to design, and that tests it and proves it out right there.
Yeah. And I know that last thing I'm going to say is I tend to have some shippers listen in. I have a lot of great connections in the shipper side of the industry. And so hopefully they learn some stuff like behind the scenes about brokerages today. But I would also say that brokerages that have been tested through a low market cycle and come out of that are, I mean, they're like fire tested, right? And so as a shipper, it gives
Hmm.
me more confidence in negotiation meetings when you're saying, hey, look, market's saying we need a 5% reduction, you're our incumbent, and that brokerage is able to say, okay, like we got it, we can handle
Hmm.
that. That's a power move right now. I mean, nobody
Yeah.
wants to take a reduction in margins. I think most shippers are fair. I think they're trying to handle negotiations with respect right now, knowing that things are going to change. But when you have brokers who are like, we really can't, or if they're trying to push for an increase, or if they're really pushing hard to toe that line, I would be more concerned about their financial health, I think, in a sense,
Yeah.
than some of these. I am not talking about people just taking 15% margin cuts and taking volume at a loss. Like, that's not what I'm talking about here.
Hmm.
I'm just saying the way that you have the opportunity to position yourself in the brokerage space with your shippers right now, and the way shippers should be able to perceive the health of their partners right now, speaks volumes for where their business is
Yeah.
going to be headed probably in the next year, 2, 3, 10 years.
Yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, this trade-offs and decisions that you have to make, and that means working on your business and not in your business, which takes us
Yep.
back to
Yep.
to what it takes to grow a freight brokerage. It's
Yeah.
making those strategic decisions and thinking those things through.
Well, we had a couple more. Thomas said, if you can learn to sell into a down market and run on lean margins, you'll be able to scale and be successful. I
Yeah.
personally agree with that.
Yep.
As long as the margins work for you, that's what it keep that in mind. Hearing what somebody's 10% is somebody else's 20 is somebody else's 5.
Mhm.
So obviously there's a lot of variation and diversification. There's that word again in this. If only all shippers were able to think that way. I know, man. I mean, one of these days, maybe one of these days.
In a down market, right? You're building up your known presence, your credibility, your trust. You're hearing no a lot of times, which is a reason why it's good to start the business in a down market. But people know who you are, and those no's are no's. No, not right now. I don't have a need. Well, that's great. The market's going to turn, but you've already laid the groundwork of being brand recognition, sales recognition, capabilities. So you can catch it from the very beginning all the way up. Because if you start at the beginning or the middle, by the time you get on your feet and are capable and have made your presence known, you're in the down market anyway.
Kevin, if you keep preaching brand recognition and sales efforts in down, I'm going to have to employ you at Samantha Jones Consulting, because that's all we do here. So
it's the most important thing.
Focus on building in every part of the cycle. Focus on building a brand. Focus on building our prospects. All of that. That's what we focus on all the time. But Kevin, we are going to go ahead and call it at time. I'm sure we could have talked longer. I actually thought of a couple things as we went, and I was like, man, we're just going to have to get like a second episode someday.
Yeah.
But thank you so much for joining. It was awesome. If anybody is interested in your work or wants to know more about what you do, what's the best way to get in contact with you? Or is there anything they need to know about the work that you publish or anything like that?
Yeah, to see the work that I've published, LinkedIn is a great way to get in contact with me. Yeah. Just DM me or connect with me. I'm always on there. And brushpassresearch.com is where the data set lies, but all the research is written on brushpassresearch.blog. So you can go to there and check out all the freight brokerage industry research that I have available.
That's awesome. Yes. Thank you so much for joining, Kevin. And thank you everyone who joined us and met us for coffee this morning.